Hi, this is Lady Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you're watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. Hail and welcome. Today we are talking about Wiccan philosophy, and we have a very long list of things to get through. This is a kind of metaphysics heavy lecture. For the people who are more intuitive and less analytical, you're going to want to just watch this and then be like, okay, in one ear and out the other. I've heard it, I've processed it, I've learned some new terms, maybe some new ways of speaking, but I'll leave that philosophizing to the philosophers. That's totally okay. I like to just cover this. What is deity really? What physically is deity? What physically is anything? What is existence itself? I like to cover all of that. I cover it through the lens of Kabbalah as well, because Kabbalah has very similar themes. It's kind of like a primitive science. It has a lot in common with metaphysics, and when you use them together, you can kind of build a theory of literally everything and really come to understand the true nature of all things. We'll also talk about some other things, like you'll hear me use terms like life magic and death magic. What am I really talking about? Chaos, the void, disorder, order. I use these terminologies to refer to different kinds of magic, different intents for your actions, and it's all just like a big, broad way to understand how all of these things connect and interplay with each other. But it's perfectly normal for many people out there. It's very typical that they might have some understanding of this kind of material, and they take what suits them and what serves them and what helps them practice their spirituality, and then they just don't touch the rest. And you'll find a lot of people will just work with deity and aspects and not worry about this whole model of everything or what physically are they doing. They'll just be like, well, this is my interpretation, this is how it works for me, and this is my spirituality, so I don't care about all of this technical correct stuff. So I just do this first, and then we put it aside and go have fun and do the creative, intuitive, get to know yourself and feel what you feel kind of stuff. Get this out of the way. Let's start by talking about one truth. What do I mean when I say that there is objective truth? There is objective truth in the universe. There's one truth, one fundamental truth, and it is that we are one universe experiencing itself. That's the truth. And in order to understand where that comes from, we have to do a little bit of metaphysics. So I am going to talk a little bit here about the scientific method and why some of the things we're about to bring up, even though they are called theories, they are not just a theory. In science, a theory is not just a guess. It's a time-tested, repeatable process that has been crafted using specific methods that help to reduce bias. And it's not just speculation. It's something that is very close to the objective truth. In other words, what we know using science, what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. So there are still times when something we know a lot about, it will change, it'll evolve, we'll discover, we'll add a corrective factor that only matters under certain circumstances. That is the kind of correction that comes to these theories, not, okay, this theory is completely wrong. If everyone in the scientific community is backing a certain theory, there's a lot of good reasons for that. It's very unlikely that that theory will be totally wrong. It's more likely that it'll just need adjustments and corrections over time. So I'm going to tell you where the current consensus lies when it comes to some theoretical physics and tie that into metaphysics and a theory of literally everything. So that theory that I want to talk about is quantum gravity. Now, if you are interested in this subject, I have an entire course up on our website, covenantoftheopenmind.com, where you can find a Metaphysics 101 course. You should go through that. It's all lectures just like here on YouTube. It's got further readings and assignments the same way as here, and I really dive a lot deeper into all of these concepts. For here, I'm really just going to talk about these terms and what they are and where they come from and what they mean, things that you'll see again and again throughout the spiritual community and lots of other authors' books and content. And this will just give you the tether to reality, right? Which we'll talk about the importance of that before the end of this lecture. It'll give you the understanding of what is objectively true, so that you can always keep that in mind, even while you do things that are subjectively true, that are true for just you and not everybody else. So quantum gravity is a theory that merges two extremes. It merges general relativity and string theory, which are two big theories that explain like really massive parts of science, and they have many derivative theories and various things. So basically, general relativity is describing the nature of gravity. It's looking at the physics of the astral realm, which is the scale of space, vast distances, slow moving force. It's weak compared to the other forces, but still can act across any distance in space, even if it should be impossible for you to send light that would reach the other side. Still, somehow those objects can attract. So it functions on a level of physics that we don't even fully understand yet, and that's where theories like quantum gravity come from, because they're taking the particle physics and things that we understand a lot better now in the modern age and merging it with some of these big astrological theories that are harder to measure and observe and, you know, prove various components of it in order to create a better theory. So that's why it's useful to try to merge these two together. And the important takeaway from the science, why they are not compatible, is that in general relativity background, it's background independent. So it means that the physics that goes on the realm of space, it depends on the shape of space-time, and the shape of space-time depends on what goes on. So they're connected, they're bound together. And all of that is to say, you know, like planets are big celestial bodies in space, stars, galaxies. These things, they influence the curvature of space. They influence the way that light moves through space. They influence the way that time passes. They change the physics of space by existing in it as massive objects. That is what we mean by general relativity being background independent. With quantum physics and most of string theory, which is like the explanation of where particles come from and why anything exists and is not just energy. Why does it, you know, exist as physical beings that can be in space and not just like energy? You know, how am I sitting here talking to you with sound waves? You know, physical reality exists somehow, and string theory is something that sort of builds a model that explains how this kind of physics of the infinite, continuous, background dependent world of particles can come to be something that is so discrete, that where there is this separation between physical things, and that's that string theory. That's, you know, the model of, you know, Hawking's model of the universe is one of the further readings in that. Metaphysics gives a great overview of that. So if you're really interested in the science, there's a lot of further knowledge you can seek on the actual science here in my other course. But for now, that's all I want to cover on the actual science of it, because it's a bit heavy. The important thing is that reconciling these two seemingly incompatible, completely opposite theories does some really interesting, it gives rise to some really interesting logical consequences, that gives rise to telling us things about the nature of the universe that are very compatible with religion, which is cool, because then it feels more like, oh, religion is this intuitive way to understand the universe, but the universe is still the same, so we should have the same understanding of it in some capacity, right? So that's what makes quantum gravity so cool. Now, so what is the science that emerges from the marriage between general relativity and quantum gravity? That would be, you know, this multiverse model that describes the universe as both continuous and discrete simultaneously, background dependent and independent simultaneously, which means there is duality in the universe. So if you're watching this and you are not a beginner, you know where this is going already into Kabbalah. Duality. It means that we are also one interconnected process, a universe experiencing itself. There are many, many observers, but really it's just one universe that we are all observing in our own unique way. And it also means that this universe that we experience, out of all the universes there could be, is the most real, because we say it is. Because we macroscopic beings were able to come to form here. So we say it is. And each universe is kind of like a marble, and you can think of it like there's a little color a little shape and colorful bit in the center of the marble that's perfectly unique. And you've got an infinite number of marbles. And what shape and color that bit at the center is determines what all of the parameters are, all of what they call cosmological constants. And those determine the physics of that universe. So all of our physical laws, all of the constants that exist in physics, things that are just observed to be true, like the speed of light being what it is, or like in math they have a letter called E that's used for like exponents and stuff. And there's just, pi is one that's a constant. So there's lots of constants, and what the value of those constants are influences everything, how all the math plays out and everything interacts. And it's all influenced by these fundamental parameters in some very complicated equations that they use in cosmology. So you can kind of derive all of physics from first principles, and those first principles are basically cosmology and quantum gravity, and they describe a universe that is a multiple, many universes, and each of them has completely different laws of physics. Completely different laws of physics. Not even just different experiences, different timelines, but altogether the physics is different. So that's the multiverse. And this one truth arises from one fact, the fact that we are one universe experiencing itself. So there are fundamental truths in all beliefs. And except for the beliefs that are truly delusional, in the sense that they are disconnected from objective reality, like they contradict objective reality. So you have objectivity and subjectivity, right? So you have the self and the world beyond the self. And if we were going to talk about the physics, I would tell you that a human consciousness is like an individual manifestation of the entire universe. It's what's called a wave equation, a wave state. And as we learn from particles, every single state in that wave function is a place where you will find an entire particle, even though it's also the sum of those states is itself the definition of the particle. It's the particle, where it is in space-time and what it's doing and what it is, right? So with humans, it's the same, right? You have like God, or the all-conscious. You have this consciousness itself, and we are the states that consciousness can then take on. And each of us is itself still an entire consciousness. It's all one. It's just, but it still has many states, and the all conscious is all the states at once combined into one entity, whereas we are just like a little blip of it, almost like a cross section. So in the objective reality, there are things that are true for everybody. In the subjective reality, there are things that are true only for the self. And those things can contradict within yourself. But if you start to say things like, you're going to go to hell for being gay, or some, crazy wacko fundamentalist Christian belief, or, there's extremism in every religion. And if you're saying that kind of thing where you're like, I think it is against divinity to have same sex because I believe that sex is for procreation, then that is perfectly rational, perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not delusional. If you then say that that's true for every person because reasons, that's when it crosses the line into delusion, because every person is unique and every person will have their own connection with deity and divinity and their own spiritual path because of their uniqueness. And that's like the point. Like, if God is an omnipotent person who knows everything and does everything deliberately, then why would he create us all to be different and have different needs if he wanted us all to do everything the same way? So that is delusional. It's right. It's believing that your subjective truth is more powerful than objective truths. That's perfectly natural for people to be homosexual, and you see it in every species, right? It's just like animals being animals. So it's silly. And that's a good example of like what the difference between a valid belief and an invalid belief. I believe this for myself, and it is the way I conduct my life. totally valid. I believe this for myself, therefore everyone else should do what I tell them to do. Not valid. And there's many examples of that, which I think I have some coming up. And there are still many ways to interpret truth. And you'll see that every single religious path is in its own way valid, even when they contradict. Atheism and agnosticism, these are just giving you the view of the universe that is based entirely around what you can objectively know, and you say, okay, well, I objectively know this, and I can't know, but there are parts of it that, taken to an extreme, it's not entirely healthy to just say, okay, well, I don't care about subjective truth. In that case, it's like, well, what's your favorite food? That's a subjective truth. What's your favorite book? That's a subjective truth. What are your hobbies? Those are subjective experiences, right? So, people need some component of self. They need some component of subjectivity. But, people who are atheists or agnostic would just say that it makes no sense to have belief. And it's like, if it's an objective truth, I can accept it. And for many of them, it's as simple as like knowing the science and learning the modern philosophy and then being like, oh, okay, I see. So, yeah, it's not like you're trying to force some dogma on me. That's not what this entire lecture on deity is doing at all. It's not about dogma. It's just about, understanding that all of these different belief systems are valid and can coexist because they're not really disagreeing with each other. They're just looking at different they're looking at the same picture through different lenses, or they're looking at different parts of the picture, but not the entire thing. And, you go from least interpretive to most interpretive, where you have things that involve practices in the middle. So if you're doing something, you're practicing something, you believe in that process is going to help you. So that's a kind of faith, but it's not quite as interpretive as believing in God or deity or something, external to yourself. So that's the spectrum, but all of them are on the same spectrum and derive from the same universe. So fundamentally, they're all the same. And this leads me to talking about the difference between how some of these paths are classified. It's different than the chart that we just saw because in the chart that we just saw, it was like all of the paths that we showed there, for the most part, people could be either on a path of power or a path of wisdom and be atheist or be, say, Wiccan, or, the power versus wisdom is really more of a statement on your morality and your general code of conduct and how you act and conduct yourself. And you will find people gravitate towards one or the other. So people that tend to believe in internal divinity, Satanism, for some, in witchcraft, they believe in empowering their internal divinity more than working with external deities. And anything that is all about and putting your will out into the universe and enforcing your will on others, and believing that you're all that matters, really, because you are at the heart of your perception of the world. So why would anything else matter more than you do in that case? So that is the left-handed path, and they call it that for Kabbalistic reasons, because in Kabbalah the left hand is the one that represents the Sephirah for judgment. And then the right hand is chesed, and that is that means kindness. So when you act with your right hand, you're said to be doing kind things. So that's the path of wisdom, the right-handed path. When you act with your left hand, you're said to be doing judgmental things, or asserting your views in some way or another. In the context of Sephirot, it would mean that you're really referring to the will of God, and people are exhibiting judgment through the lens of God's judgment, and that's why they feel compelled to bully people inside of Orthodox communities to try to conform to some standard. So a lot of toxicity can be born out of that philosophy, but it is something that is inherent in the initial Jewish Kabbalah, which is where Kabbalah comes from. So I include it when I teach the Kabbalah, even though I don't agree with it. But yeah, so the power versus wisdom, it's a true dichotomy. Because if you're acting with thought for yourself first and your needs first, you are necessarily not acting with the needs of others first. And even if you're acting in a way where there'd be mutual benefit for you and many other people, I mean, you could still argue that it's like, okay, but, are you acting to do that because you want to benefit and you're telling all those other people that they'll benefit too because you would benefit, so you want to do it, and you're doing that you can break it down to the next level of like looking at it, and you'll typically find that every action is either, born of selfish or selfless intent, and that the ideal healthy person is going to be experiencing a balance of both healthy or of both selfish and selfless calls to action. And that's because the ego is the self, right? So you should be doing things that nourish the self and foster the ego and help you feel whole and an individual that is distinct and separate from the rest, from the fact that we are one universe experiencing itself. That's true, but we're experiencing itself in small discrete forms, so we should celebrate that discreteness and the uniqueness of being individuals. And that's like why it's best to usually have some kind of balance between these extremes. But most religious paths fall towards one end of the spectrum or the other. So on the side of power, we've got Satanism and others. On the side of wisdom, we've got Wicca, Christianity, Judaism. And then you've got the things in the middle like shamanism and Buddhism to some extent, I guess, would be on the path of wisdom, could be in the middle. And it just depends on which type. And witchcraft, obviously, is gray, is in the middle. So it's like the kind of thing where you kind of have belief in God and you work with deity, but you also are empowered to do your own thing. So that's kind of a gray one as well. Now, when we talk about this duality, we're talking about something that is dichotomous. It is not a spectrum. It's not a spectrum where it's like, okay, it's either a little bit towards, it's every single action you do is either power or wisdom. But over time, the sum of the actions will tend you towards power or wisdom, and that is a spectrum. But the actual nature of the action is either or. It's dichotomous. So there's this concept, though, that eventually you realize, in the beginning it seems the more power you have, the less wisdom you have. The more wisdom you have, the less power you have, and it seems like that is the case. But as you go along, you realize that power is wisdom, and wisdom is power in a sense. And you feel empowered by wisdom, and you feel wise by the nature of wielding power, and you learn along either of those. And that's the superposition shining through. That's the superposition demonstrated, because power and wisdom are dichotomous, but both of them are real and are true, and every action is both in a sense at the same time, and then it kind of just like takes one or the other based around your intentions in the before the action, what did you intend, and also the outcomes. You're responsible for the outcomes of it as well. So something could be is something you did because you wanted to help everybody, but it wound up hurting everybody, and then how you deal with the situation after that will determine if that situation is net wisdom or net power. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how you can think about it. So Wicca and Witchcraft are in the gray. They are some of the most balanced, and they believe in having both faith in the external divinity, God around you, the gods above, and the faith in yourself and your will, and that your will is a good whole thing that you should manifest into reality, even if you're doing cursing, even if you're doing dark magic, even if you're working with spirits. Still, the fact that you have will, you're supposed to exercise will, and those are all things that the gods want us to do, that deity designed us to be capable of these things for a reason, and that's the take that you'd find in Wicca and Witchcraft. What is deity, though? So after all this talking about it, we still haven't really defined what deity is, so I will do that for you now. Deity is the consciousness of higher planar energy. It is the force of order in our universe. Order. The consciousness of higher planar energy. I talk about the planes in depth in the Metaphysics series, but what do we mean when we say that? What we really mean is just that the universe exists in a greater number of dimensions than we can physically see. And it works sort of like this. When you have a piece of paper, let's say there's some tiny ants crawling on the paper, it gets close to the edge, and we just fold it back like this. This is a two-dimensional plane. It's flat. When we fold it back like this, let's say the ant is so small that he just sees the two-dimensional plane. He doesn't know there's a third dimension. We fold through the third dimension. He doesn't know that's there. He crawls off. We unfold it, and then he's like, oh, it's magic. And that is the reason why humans don't understand how magic works, because it happens in a higher number of dimensions than we can physically conceive of. So it's not something that we can physically describe or physically experience. It's something that we just relate to abstractly. And that's all we mean. When we say planes of existence, we're talking about the numbers of dimensions. 4 dimensions: height, depth, width, and time. Right? That's the room I'm in right now. The time is ticking and I'm taking too long to get through subjects. All of that is 4 dimensions. 5th dimension is a split in time. The 6th dimension is a fold through time, and it goes all the way up until eventually you're outside of time, outside of reality, and you're experiencing physics in a way that doesn't really make sense in our physical macroscopic conception of the universe. Where are the higher planes of existence, right? Without going too deep into the metaphysics, like we just talked about, folds and splits, but where are these dimensions? Are they places you can travel to? Like I'm traveling to an alternate dimension, like in bad science fiction? No, that's not how it works. The dimensions are just properties of matter, in the same way that height is a property of matter. If something has a lot of height, it's tall. Okay, so if something has a lot of whatever the 5th dimension is, then it exists on many timelines. And that's how it works. They're abstract dimensions. They're not dimensions of physical matter. And they're hidden. We don't experience them physically. We're too big. Literally, the particles inside of us that might experience these kinds of things that exist as waves, they interfere with each other and decohere and break down so that we can't do things that particles can do, right? Particles, we can do quantum tunneling. We shoot particles at a wall, and after a certain period of time, a predictable number of those particles will somehow have magically been on the other side of the wall all along. And that's just how particles work. They'll just fold through the higher dimensions in ways we don't really fully understand or like can conceive of, and they'll just fold through them and be in a different place in space-time, just like our ant, and it'll look like magic. But no matter how many times I run at the wall, I'm slow, but let's say that someone fast was doing it, no matter how many times they run at the wall, they're never going to run fast enough to magically be on the other side of the wall, and they were on the other side all along. That's never going to happen. They're too big, okay? So their particles are interfering with each other. It's called decoherence. And as a result of that decoherence, the higher dimensions are hidden from us, and we don't experience them except in our awareness. But we know that the higher planes of awareness have consciousness. And this is the important takeaway from all the science, right? If you go and watch my 9 hours of talking about metaphysics, then you'll realize that deity is a logical consequence of the science, and that our science has evolved so far that we can actually prove the existence of higher consciousness using only scientific principles and logic. And it really boils down to the fact that we are the higher planes of existence. Where are they? Everywhere. Within everything that exists, within our bodies, within our rooms, within the sky outside, within every star, in every galaxy, everywhere in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe, and beyond. Everywhere that exists exists in 10 dimensions, higher numbers of dimensions, okay? And the higher dimensions are concealed within the smaller ones, so you just can't see them. So because the smaller dimensions have consciousness, because we are conscious, therefore the energy that is existence itself, the energy that comes to make us up, must have consciousness on higher planes of existence. But what that consciousness looks like, whether or not you can have a relationship with it, and what that relationship looks like or what it should look like, none of those questions can be answered by science. So people who are atheists are like, well, there's no point to answering those questions because they don't have an objective answer. Hey, that's not an invalid belief. The people that say, oh, well, the answer is that we are here to experience life wholly because we're trying to enrich God too, and he's experiencing, all of the possible ways that life can manifest through us, and go and live it up. Like, that's also completely valid. The people that believe that we live so that we could do good things, so that we could have a happy afterlife. I mean, doing good things that builds up your soul, that enriches everyone, that helps you learn lessons. It's a path of wisdom. So yeah, that probably will, reduce the amount of effort and time it takes to get to a place of enlightenment one day. So it's like, yeah, everybody's beliefs come from the same truth. The same underlying universe that we all are and are experiencing. So the only time that someone's beliefs are invalid are when they're like, well, my belief is more valid than yours. And that's when it's like, well, but is it? No, it's not. So that's how you know that the higher planes of existence are conscious. That's how you know that all the beliefs are valid. And that brings us into Kabbalah. So, the planes of existence. The planes of existence in Kabbalah, they have names that come out of Hebrew. The first plane, the plane that we live on, is called Asiyah, and it means action. So you can see the primitive science. On this plane of existence, everything that exists has to exist for a length of time. It has to have a height. It has to have a depth. It has to have a width. If it does not have one of those things, it does not exist. It does not physically exist without height, width, depth, and time. It has to exist for a period of time. And those are the requirements of physical things. And everything that physically exists is experiencing the passing of time. And it's moving, it's decaying, it's changing. It's never sitting completely still, because the forces that make up our world, the higher dimensions, are doing things that we can't see and influencing the world in ways that are so subtle that we would never be able to see them. We can only see the effects of them. We can see something rusting over time, but we don't see the physical, actual interaction that is happening, that where all of the metal atoms become oxidized. We don't see that. We just see the rust forming slowly over time. And that's the same thing, right? It's too small. It's concealed from our view. Everything on the plane of existence that we live in, the physical reality that we live in, physical manifestation, it physically exists, and nothing is more powerful in the physical world than a physical conscious actor, a person who is acting consciously in a physical capacity. A human is always more powerful than a ghost or a demon or even a deity. In the confines of their own physical life. They're never going to be able to make you do something physically. It's always going to be you who ultimately decides to do it. And that's because, and if they want to have any kind of physical power, if you want to start seeing these entities take on enough power to haunt a place, or, to move things around and it gets spooky, it requires an investment of energy from people who physically exist. Because it doesn't physically exist until we make it. So, exactly the same way as how electrons are like waves, doing whatever they feel like until we look at them, and then they act like matter. Well, that's how it works for any of this stuff. It's all the same, going up the numbers of dimensions, and you can watch the Metaphysics series if you want more details about that. Yetzirah and Beraya are the lower and upper gardens of Eden. That's said to be where the deities reside. The Summerland, the other world, the underworld, these would be the higher planes of existence, higher in quotes, because it's not like they're above us, they're within us. They're higher as in they're greater, they're transcendent. But they are, in fact, the same exact space as the room I'm sitting in, the walls behind me, my face, that's all God. So, we are all one 10-dimensional being within many 4-dimensional lives. Many observers in one universe. That is the scientific phrasing that comes out of quantum gravity. That the universe is, and it arose out of the science as a way to deal with a paradox in the math. But it turns out, that is what the Kabbalah has always said. So it's, like, oh, thanks, good science, good scientists. You have proven this right. Many observers, one universe. That is the truth. Okay, so that leads me to talking about what it means that part of our existence is not physical. Part of us is transcendent. Part of us exists on every plane of existence, even while we are in this embodied physical existence and confined to act in a physical way and experience reality according to our current physics. So what is the soul? What is the component of us that is timeless? It is the part of us that is beyond the weavings of any one lifetime. And it is kind of like if you have a water drop or some kind of like larger coalescence of some material, a crystal. You have something that is a collection of many particles. And each of those individual particles by itself, is a collection of energy and essence and experience, in a sense. And no two of them are exactly the same. But then they come together and they form a crystalline structure, or they form a water droplet. And that would be like the soul. That would be like who you are across your many lifetimes. So you could think of yourself like a crystal, which is useful because we're going to talk about the prism principle and how we're all like crystals. We're all like prisms in our own way. And you could think about yourself like a crystal, and you're unique, and you have a unique energy to you because the exact nature of the crystalline structure that makes you up is different than anybody else, because all of the little molecules that are inside of your crystalline structure are a unique lifetime that you've had on this world or some other world. So all souls together, though, would be like the river. So you have the whole river. It's one collection of water, breaks down into little water droplets. That's each of our souls, and that breaks down into the molecules, and that's each of our lifetimes. So that's the analogy to explain that. And Wiccans don't believe in Hollywood style magic. They don't. Wiccans are not like out here shooting fireballs at each other and like doing like combat and like LARPing or anything. I mean, maybe they do that for fun, but not for like religious reasons. We just, physical macroscopic objects, we obey different rules than particles because we're too big, because of decoherence. So we don't believe we're shooting fireballs. We don't believe we're running through walls. We're teleporting. That's not what magic is. And instead, magic really is, awareness of higher planar consciousness. It's seeing past the veil and coming to know truths that are taken from the wisdom of the earth, the wisdom of our ancestry, the wisdom of timelessness and almost like whispers on the wind. We can come to know things and sense things through the part of our physical existence that is metaphysical in nature, right? So at the core of all of us, there is a nervous system, and that nervous system works with electrical gradients. So that's a field. That's an electric field that's very small. That it's susceptible to interference, and that is and when it's that is when it's able to some kind of tiny perturbation, the movements of planets around the sun, the gravitational waves that creates, right? So that's the basis of astrology. That can interfere with us on that tiny level. We pick it up and sense it. We have some subliminal change in behavior, and then it has large manifested consequences on the nature of existence through our physical actions. So it influences us metaphysically, and through us, then physically. So deity acts through us. And that is like, it's almost like the part of, working with deity is like working with, the part of existence that you don't have power over. So some people will just say, well, I don't have power over it, so there's no sense even trying to influence it. I'm going to put my will out there and do my part, and that's enough for me. That's just straight witchcraft. Some people are like, well, I don't have power over it, but I may as well get to know it and try to have some understanding of it anyway. And any understanding of it that I can come to will influence me for the positive, so that I could be more aligned with the stuff that I don't have control over, and then that will make me in turn more effective at putting my will into the universe as well. So just different philosophies, and that's why you'll find some people gravitate more towards just witchcraft, and some people prefer the more like wisdom component of Wicca. The chakras are the energy centers within us that allow us to pick up on these things, and they're said to be, they're different kinds of cells. So they're said to have different abilities to pick up on different kinds of energy, and all of that stuff is stuff we will cover in a future lecture. But this is the scientific basis of it that we will revisit very, very quickly, and that's why I'm just mentioning all these things now. What is magic then? What is a concise definition of magic? To go with our concise definition of deity, magic is an aligned awareness. It's drawing out the deeper levels of knowledge and wisdom that are found within us and within the world around us. So also the wisdom of the earth and that sort of thing. And it's all with the purpose of gaining some amount of control over how external energy, the things that we don't inherently have control over, we want to gain some control still over how that will manifest in our lives. So that's what magic is. Not shooting fireballs at each other. Magic is the art of devising a process. Magic is like the translation software between will and manifestation, what you're visualizing in your brain. How do you inspire commitment from that? How do you inspire actual change from that? How do you bring that dream into manifestation? That is magic. That the process of doing that is magic, especially once it becomes a repeatable process, something that you can do again in slightly different circumstances, and you have some comfort level with different kinds of things. Then it really starts to feel like, okay, this is my magic, this is my witchcraft, this is my process, and you always feel like I have a go-to, I know what to do. If I don't know what to do, I know what to do, and it's make a process. So, this doesn't mean that you can't believe in science. I mean, this is not an invalidation of science. This depiction of magic is perfectly compatible with science, and I'd say most modern witches believe that if your scientific knowledge can be harnessed to further the purposes of your spell, that's even better. Take whatever knowledge you can from anywhere you can. That's always been the Wiccan, and the seek the mysteries. That's always been the heart of Wicca and witchcraft. This leads us into talking about different kinds of energy. So you have death energy versus life energy. These are two things you'll hear me use to refer to types of magic that you can do. Death magic is something that taps into what we call spirit passive, whereas life is spirit active, and they're two sides of the same coin. So you have the elements, and when you have all of those combined, you get spirit, and that's what the star represents. The four elements combined give you spirit, and spirit active is generating energy from yourself, experiencing life, using herbs, eating, drinking, having fun, dancing, right? Having sex, right? Living. That is all spirit active practices of life magic, life energy. It aligns with the fae, the elements, creatures of life and mirth. Whereas death energy, that's going to be, ghosts and ancestors, and that's going to be things like seeking ego death, speaking less, living less, Sometimes people will inflict to themselves, like take blood, like cut blood from their hand, or fasting is a common way, or sleep deprivation. There's ways that you can like inflict yourself. It makes the visions more intense as well. So as you work into that side of things, you can get more involved and really just work on being able to see past the veil and hear the voices underneath, and just come to understand the wisdoms that are beyond you. And working with both life and death is very beneficial, but life and death are, again, a true dichotomy that are superposition, because it's like an oscillation between life and death, and where you get a concentration of life, you have a person, and a concentration of death, you have a ghost. So it's like just memory is all it really is. It's current memory, lived memory, existed memory, and then it's also past memory or future memory, which is all death. Like if it's in the past or the future, it's technically all death energy. It's all the same energy. It's potential. We're really talking about potential versus kinetic energy. And you're either dead or you're alive, right? So that's how easy it is. It's a superposition. It's dichotomous. You're not going to be something in between dead and alive. Not in this reality anyway. So the divine realm, where the Lord and Lady dwell, some call, the association between Adam and Eve, and other archetypes of deity that are masculine and feminine. On this plane, there's only two forces: the force of push and pull, aggression, reception, ebb and flow. It's two forces that just go around pushing and just in an eternal dance, is what we say in Wicca. And this is the space where life and death become one, right? So that you can see the themes of fertility in that, and the Wicca inherently in that kind of phrasing. And so where life and death become one, there is transcendence. So that's why Wiccans do both life and death magic. We don't shy away from the death magic like some other path of wisdom religions do. In Wicca, we believe in balance and worshiping death and life the same. So the other opposite side of all of this that you'll hear me talk about is chaos. So chaos would be if life and death are oscillations between life and death, then both of those combined are existence, and the opposite of existence is non-existence. And so you also have, on a higher plane of existence, in a greater number of dimensions, the fabric of space-time doesn't just oscillate between aggressive and receptive. It doesn't just oscillate between life and death. It also oscillates in between existing and not existing. So it's another layer of abstraction. And deity, and that's where the concept of order comes from. So order is life and death, the cycle of life and death. Order is, the fact that we came from like a cosmic plasma soup mess, and somehow like 14 billion years later here we are like physically talking to each other like through cameras and interacting across space-time in this interesting way. And that is really just like what it is to have order in the world. It's like there's some divine plan that allowed it to go from this little seed. You plant a little seed in the ground, and it starts off, just putting some roots out, and then shooting up, and then starting to flower and grow up, and suddenly you've got this big mature plant. It's like, wow, you would never have guessed that this big thing was going to come out of this tiny seed. And every time you plant the same kind of seed, the same kind of plant grows. That is what we are talking about when we say like a higher order, a divine plan. We're talking about the fact that the universe is biased towards order. Order begets order. People want to see order in things. But disorder, that's the opposite of order. That's a lack of existence. That is the infinite void. That is non-existence. And you'll hear people use the word chaos to talk about disorder, sometimes simultaneously, but chaos most often really refers to the force that takes something from ordered to disordered and back again. And chaos is kind of like the way that all beings that are conscious on this level influence the physical world. It's never directly, they're never going to just like, you know, I mean, I guess they could shock you with lightning because that is an inherently chaotic process. So the idea that God smites people with lightning is not a bad understanding of it, I guess. But, you know, most of the time, if, you know, if karma's coming to get you, it's like some subtle thing that like you didn't realize you were making a mistake and then suddenly it's all over. You know, it's not usually this big smited kind of experience. Is like more subtle and more undercurrents. Or, you know, if you're going to be blessed, like you lose your job and then you find a better one and you're like, oh, blessings, like this is a way better situation. So that's the way that deity and demons together, the two sides of existence itself and non-existence, interact and propagate change into the world on a much higher level than just, you know, by pushing stuff across the room. So you've got disorder on one side, order on the other, and chaos in the middle. This is another true dichotomy. Things are either ordered or they're not. And chaos transitions in between them. On the disorder side, you're going to be talking about demons, like the consciousness of disorder. Doesn't really make sense. But what we really mean is when we say the consciousness of disorder, we're really talking about the consciousness of chaos more so. This is why the terms get mixed up, because chaos is going to be how the disorder manifests into the ordered world. So you don't get a demon until you manifest disorder into the ordered world, until you are experiencing chaos. Then a demon can come to manifest in that chaos. So it's a little bit difficult to understand because we're talking about non-existence, which is hard for people who exist to understand and talk about with language that exists. You know, so the way to interact with that force is non-being and non-thinking, no movement, you know, wu wei. It's very like actually compatible with Taoism. But yeah, I mean, so disorder is something that most witches don't really make use of too much. I do, and a lot of people in our coven do. We just we're drawn to chaos. But many people who are Wiccan and who do witchcraft do not make use of chaos or disorder at all. So I'll skate over it for most of this course and just talk about demons a little bit, usually in the context of how do I know if this is a ghost or a demon, because that's when it comes up the most for witches and Wiccans. On the other side, you have order, that's deity, heaven, you know, the idea of like breaking the cycle of reincarnation to dwell in the ecstasy of God, right? That's the idea that you're trying to become the ultimate ordered being so that you have no point to exist in the world because you have nothing left to learn because you're perfectly ordered. And order is the cycle of life and death, ebb and flow, all experience, everything that exists. That's order. So you'll hear me use these terms again and again throughout the course, throughout my book. I have devised this theory of everything that can, you know, explain all religions and what they have in common and is compatible with science, and that's where these terms come from. So it's sort of like the formal framework, if you will, but we'll be deviating from that quite a bit in order to learn how to have a relationship with these concepts. The last level of existence is the level of God himself, right? The emanating light. So I wanted to just mention this in the context of Kabbalah. This comes up with the subject of recognizing patterns and being able to recognize patterns, and the fact that, like, you know, 1 1 1 1, 5 ones in a row, and something like 4 4 1 2 9. Those are equally likely. Like if you roll the dice 5 times, getting the first or getting the second, it's equally likely that you'd have one or the other. So, you know, from a distance, chaotic things can look ordered, and the ability of humans to find ordered patterns in things that are inherently disordered is proof of the bias towards order that exists. We are ordered beings, so we are biased to seeing order, even in systems that are inherently disordered. And because of that, we propagate order into reality. And in Jewish Kabbalah, this is captured in the prayer, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, which means hear Israel, or like the people of God, right? Hear, people of God, that God is the heavenly host, right? God is all souls, all transcendency, every person that exists in all of the dimensions they exist in. God is all of them combined as one. He is the heavenly host. He is all of it. Adonai Eloheinu. And then you say Adonai Echad, which means one, combined into one. It emanates, it arises from one source, right? So that is the duality of this emanating light, and the bias toward order is sort of captured in one foundational prayer that you find in Jewish Kabbalah. Another thing to mention, the name of God, by the way, coming out of Kabbalah, the name is called the Tetragrammaton. You'll see people actually write it out. I don't, because I was an Orthodox Jew for a while, so I just picked up the cultural politeness of not saying the name of God, because it says, in their religious text that you're not supposed to, and that names have power, which we know to be true. So when you're vibrating this name that you're not supposed to say, it's got this feeling to it of being like, well, I can do whatever I want, and what I want is best, and I know best, and that is going to breed ego and build the ego. So that's something to keep in mind, and I'll talk about that as I talk about the LBRP in a second. But so the name of God, if you were to write it out, it is the conjugation of the verb to be, as in the past, present, and future all at once. So God's name literally means was, is, and will be simultaneously, and that's because God is. That's the true statement. God is. And if you put anything after the is, then you're qualifying God in ways that are mortal, or based on, you're projecting your own part of existence onto this being that is existence himself. And that's why people can say, well, God is good. It's like, well, that's your opinion. God is, the truth is that God is. Okay, everything else is just a subjective truth, which is not in value. That subjective truths have value and define reality, but you're never going to find a subjective truth to be as powerful as an objective truth. That's the nature of it. So, God the All-Conscious, they call it Ein Sof as well. That's like a Yiddish term. It means like the infinite light, the emanating light. And the idea is that, God is beyond infinite. And if you hear him speak, then it's said to destroy you, and it kills you, and they bring you back to life. And what they're really talking about in the experience in the Old Testament, they're talking about ego death. They're saying it kills your individual self. You experience ego death when you hear the words of God. And that's why vibrating God's name can be a dangerous thing to do, because you can hear God and lose yourself in that higher consciousness. So Wiccans usually avoid seeking a relationship with this level of deity. They don't work with the all-conscious. Most of them don't refer to God. Most of them are very duotheistic, referring to a god and a goddess, the Lord and Lady. I have a very Jewish influenced practice, so you'll hear my vernacular is a little different than most Wiccans. Most Wiccans might refer to this Ein Sof or Atzilut, these higher planes of existence, as the unknowable realms, the realm beyond the divine realm, and they typically will work with deity in aspects, which are personified versions of deity. It's our projection of humanity onto deity that allows us to relate to deity more directly. And it's not it's a metaphor, right? So it's not always going to be as perfect a relationship. You're not going to have a perfect depiction of what deity is when you work with aspects of deity, but you're going to have a better depiction than not working with deity at all. So it's kind of like a stepping stone, or like a bridge to connect with this large abstract concept in a way that won't make you go mad if you make a mistake working with the energy or something. So that's why people work with deity and aspects. And aspects are in Christianity. They are, even Adam and Eve are aspects, right? So you find aspects in every religion, it's all over. Projecting the mortal ego onto deity can be really useful, and throughout this course we'll learn why and how that is the case. This is going to be mind-numbing. This is going to be making your head spin a little bit, probably, if you are not following the metaphysics, or you have not done the metaphysics course before coming here. But when we're talking about consciousness, we're going to use, and archetypes, we're going to use what's called Jungian Archetypes. Carl Jung is a philosopher, a psychologist and philosopher. And, he has come up with a conception of what it means that we all act in similar ways, and that all of our stories follow similar patterns, and how there are archetypes of existence that arise from a lot of sources. Some of these archetypes arise from the nature of our biology, like the desire of us to come together and be one with another person so that we can produce children. That's born of biology. It's a common experience that many of us want to have, and you see it in many stories, love stories, you know, since the dawn of time. You've seen this archetype. The archetype of having a guide, an older person who can coach you and counsel you. There's different types of archetypes of all of these forms. And many of them come from, you know, you have a relationship with your parents, and then one day you become the parents, right? So there's a lot of things arise from that biology, but still other things arise from the fundamental forces of physics and the way that these things interact in fundamental ways, and we can perceive of those even though we can't physically experience them, and they can influence our understanding of reality and influence the kinds of stories we tell and the kind of dreams we have. So to just give you an overview of this, you know, the collective unconsciousness of humanity is referring to the nature of people to act in predictable ways even when they have nothing in common with each other besides being human, being animals, being conscious observers. And the collective unconsciousness of humanity really is the collective consciousness of the plane above ours. And then it goes down to another level where the collective consciousness of that's the collective unconsciousness of the plane above ours. So there's like this tiered system that you can build on top of the existing Jungian archetypes if you also factor in the planes of existence and the other meta-science that maybe Jung was not as aware of, that wasn't as prominent or as well established when he was first writing about the archetypes. So that's an interesting thing if you already know about this to some extent, but I don't want to waste too much time on it since we're running low on time. The important thing is that we pull from our heritage, both our biological and our spiritual heritage, what past lives we've had, what is the story of our soul, what is our spiritual genetics in the sense of what stars were we born under. All of these things have archetypes associated with them, have energies associated with them, so they'll influence us. And we ourselves, humans, are archetypes as well. We're archetypes of God, right? We're little versions of Him. We're little... Right, so you can think about everything in terms of archetypes. It's very useful, so we'll do that a lot. Last, I want to just talk about the LBRP. That's called the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. A lot of people learn this from other places, and it's sus. Okay, it's suspicious. The LBRP is sus. We had a member of our organization who we have not talked to in a long time, who was a leader, who just sort of fell off our radar. But he and I used to be very close, and his name... he was Brother Damien, if anyone remembers, and he worked with occult forces, and he was very hermetic influenced, and he decided, okay, I'm going to do the LBRP every day, and he had the skill to actually do it, which is not true for most beginners, and he did it, evocation of deity and all, in the true form, the original form that was written down by, what's his name, Rigardi, Israel Rigardi, and I think that was the original form that was written down, and he did it every single day and started to just lose his mind. He could not keep track of reality. He was dissociative. He was having hallucinations, and I was like, this is why you're not supposed to vibrate the name of God. This is why you're not supposed to just evoke deity, because you lose yourself to it. Because you, an individual consciousness standing next to all that, it's like you're going to get lost in that. So evocation of deity is dangerous. Calling it down by name, vibrating it, should only be done through aspects of deity, not usually the entirety of deity, and that's why you don't say the name of God. The shield work that you might do using life energy is not going to protect you. But if you were going to do it, you could use chaos or more advanced shield work, and that's why we will talk about evocation of deity, which is used in Wicca by Wiccan leaders. We'll talk about that later. It's just a very advanced practice because the kind of shield working required for it is advanced. It requires invocative shield work. The Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, which is in its original form, using vibrating the names of deity, evoking deity in order to summon the elements, that is going to cause havoc for people, but it has a legacy, right? Because the summoning pentagrams are things that we got from this. Things you may experience, like if you lose your mind to this, like if you lose your mind to deity, if you do too much evocation of deity, if you have binding issues gone wrong, delusions of grandeur, dissociation, ego death. They call it catastrophe. Drug addiction, illness, personality changes, even schizophrenia or like narcissism or like other, personality disorders, major personality changes. Demons can come into manifest as well if people are working with like a darker side of this kind of energy, because remember, demons and deity are kind of like two halves of a coin. So when you're working with archetypes, you have to make sure they're archetypes of order and not disorder. And that's very key. But so we get a lot of things. We've learned a lot of habits and traditions from appropriating from the Hermetic orders in Wicca. And one of them are the summoning and banishing pentagrams. So most people will tell you to do the LBRP, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, because they want you to learn the banishing pentagrams. They want you to learn how to draw the pentagrams to open the gates, and that is okay. That is not going to cause you any problem. You can call the quarters, you can summon the elements, by drawing symbols in the air. Imagine the gates opening and the element flooding in. That's never going to cause you any problems, unless you're like really disrespectful of nature, I guess, or like using the energy that you summon to some purpose that is not in line with nature and the world and the energies that you're calling on. But for the very most part, but that's why I say the LBRP is sus, because the way that it's written in its original form and presented as a beginner exercise, even though it's not, I really just look at it and I'm like, this is a trap. And my friend who was in the Hermetics, who like eventually he stopped doing this every day, and he's like, yeah, I think you're right. Like, this was put in there because anyone who is skilled enough to do it would then lose their minds before they could read the rest of the grimoire and learn the rest of the secrets, right? So anyone that was actually a beginner, it wouldn't hurt them because they would just do it and then nothing would come from it because they don't really know what they're doing. So it's one of those things where it's like it was designed to trap people who were skilled, who were looking at their book and shouldn't have been or something. I don't know, very interesting. But I think that the LBRP is sus and that people should generally avoid it. There are better ways to learn the summoning and banishing pentagrams now, so I would do that instead. Lastly, I just want to mention this. Enlightenment, I talk about what it is in my book. You can read that. It's not a major focus in Wicca. Some say that it's the purpose of life. Some say that you'll never find it if you seek it. Some say that there's just no purpose to seeking it, and that desiring to seek it is born of the ego anyway. So even just desiring enlightenment is proof that you're not ready for it. Some say that it's basically just a state of being. It's a state of being where it's easy for you to act in accordance with both your desires and your true self, and to be in tune with the universe and the world around you at the same time. And it's easy for you to be happier and healthier and better than you were before with every action you make. It's easy for you to generally make those good choices for yourself. And I like to say that being enlightened is really a state of being where your psychology never gets in the way of you being effective, where it's like you can have any feelings, you can be experiencing anything, you can almost endure anything because you're just like, well, I know how to deal with my feelings, experience my feelings, let them go, process this. I'm always going to get through everything and be my best self in the future, and that gives me peace, right? So that's really what enlightenment is. Most people in Wicca say there's not a point to seeking it. If you're on your last life, great. Maybe that is something you want to look into. If you're a young soul, you're not on your last life, there's no sense in worrying about it. And that's just how most Wiccans look at enlightenment. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the lecture. This time you'll be reading the last few sections of Chapter 1, Deity, Kabbalah, and Enlightenment. And then there's 2 more exercises at the end of Chapter 1 and another half of the questions to do, another 10 questions. So that would be the homework for this one, and I will put all of these as assignments in our classroom if you're doing this with us live. If not, you can find all of this information on our website, and you'll be able to get the link to that in the description of this as well. So, thank you for joining us for our lecture today, and I hope that you're getting a lot out of this, and may your path to divinity and what kind of relationship you're supposed to have with divinity be made clear to you in time. Blessed be.